your immune system's going to respond. But if you're constantly being inundated by this inflammation signal, we only have so many immune cells, right? So we can only allocate so many resources to that response, which increases your risk for colds, bacterial infections.
Before we get into the ways that people can really reduce inflammation in their bodies, let's talk about the potential consequences of inflammation that people might be familiar with.
Sure. So, I mean, common things are common. Weight gain is a simple one, brain fog, joint aches, muscle pains. Those are simple ones people experience on a day to day basis. Mood fluctuations, people having heightened states of depression, anxiety, things like that. Longer term issues associated with inflammation, you're looking at diabetes, heart disease, increased risk of stroke, cognitive issues. Those are kind of the long term, like bigger mountains that an individual has to navigate through if they have prolonged inflammation for a long period of time. But on the day to day, I would just say it's probably the best descriptor is I just don't feel quite right,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. So, um, yeah, it's hard to really nail in because inflammation, when we use it in our day to day vernacular, is kind of like an adjective, right? But it's not necessarily a descriptor, more as something that's happening biochemically, physiologically inside the body that has a multitude of impacts depending on where it's occurring, how long it's been occurring, to what degree. So we use it somewhat loosely, and I don't think people necessarily understand etiology, what's contributing to it, how really simple it is to correct in terms of excessive inflammation, and also allowing people to understand that eliminating inflammation is not the goal, right?
Hmm.
Like, you know, we've talked about previously, the inflammation pathways are messaging pathways. We need them. That's how our immune system responds, identifies things that are not going right, tissue, foreign invaders, bacteria, viruses, whatever. So we need it. So this crusade to eliminate all inflammation is a bit uh, inaccurate and probably problematic long term. What we need to do is understand, how do we control it? How do we have an appropriate amount? Because there is reasonable belief based on tons of data, both case reports as well as objective, that if you can minimize unnecessary inflammation, you should live a long and healthy life. Your overall health risks, health issues should be fairly minimized.
Wow. So, what are the main causes of inflammation then?
Yeah, I would say it's stress. So we can use that as a broad-based term. So stresses are not always bad. We have good stresses, we have bad stresses. The majority of the stress that we associate with that word are negative stresses, right? So lack of sleep, poor diet, lack of exercise, work-related stress. The good stresses, eating well, strong community support, people around you that can, provide emotional, physical, spiritual uplifting. Um, and then I think I mentioned exercise, but that's a positive stress on the body. So what we need to look at is the balance of stresses that we're being subjected to, and how do we minimize the negative, maximize the positive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I love that you pointed out that inflammation is not something that we just want to completely do away with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like, when people are Google searching with positive intent, how do I stop inflammation in my body?
Correct.
That's probably not something that we want to do completely,
Yeah,
correct?
stop. I mean, it's just such a general term, stopping inflammation, right? It's like, you know, obesity, right? Excess body fat. We know obesity, adipose cells that are essentially the building blocks of fat in excess in large volumes can contribute to inflammation. But if we said we're on a crusade to eliminate fat from the body, that'd be insane. Your brain's 8 pounds of fat. Like, we need
Hmm.
fat. It's a building block of cholesterol, hormones, all these things. Again, what we have to understand is balance. Like, what can we introduce into our daily life that's minimizing bad, optimizing good, and then the body should take care of itself. Like, it's the most intricately complex yet also simple machine that's ever been created. And as long as we keep the environment reasonable for it to function, we should live a long and healthy life with minimal impact of these chronic diseases that have overtaken us, that have consumed the American population as well as the global population now.
What are some of these chronic diseases that people seem to be suffering with?
Obesity related diseases, diabetes, heart disease, cognitive dysfunction, which is probably correlated to inflammation, as well as excess body fat, blood sugar issues. Those are the primary ones. If you look at the top 10 sources of morbidity and mortality for the American population, you could probably argue that or nine of the 10 are associated with some sort of preventable illness. And a lot of those things, the root cause is excess inflammation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, like, for instance, heart disease. What contributes to heart disease? Well, it's inefficient perfusion, blood flow caused by atherosclerosis, meaning hardening of arteries. Well, how do arteries harden? If you want to get simple with it, it's excess inflammation, and these oxidative reactive oxygen species that are the byproducts of inflammatory reactions are starting to change the composition of our vessels, which are meant to be flexible so they can compensate for blood flow, and they become like a solid cement tube. And now all of a sudden, our vascular system has to work harder to get blood to tissue that needs it. So if we again minimize inflammation, minimize those reactive oxygen species, and that's where people use anti-inflammatories, antioxidants, things like that, we should maintain patent and functional, blood flow, vascular system. From a diabetes standpoint, blood sugar is something that we're starting to be able to measure almost in real time with these continuous glucose monitors that are becoming commercially available. Well, sugar is essentially, in large volume, toxic to the body. We need it, but we don't need large volumes. Again, not eliminating sugar from our diet completely, but making sure we're consuming an appropriate amount. If we have blood sugar that's too high for too long, that's going to impact liver function. That's going to impact pancreatic function. We're not going to be as sensitive to insulin, and we're going to see this chain reaction of things that's basically associated with a high elevation of a toxic substance that's circulating in our system, and the outcomes can contribute to cerebral vascular disease, or strokes and things like that, heart disease, um yeah, a whole host of health issues. So again, like, we need to refocus our conversation not necessarily on eliminating something like inflammation, but making sure that we are monitoring how much is present for how long. Because again, small doses intermittently for a long period of time, our overall health outcomes should improve across the board.
I love that. So you mentioned that we have eustress, right? We have like
Good stress, yeah.
exercise, good stress, but then we have
Distress, bad stress.
distress,
Yeah,
right?
it's a I'm in distress. Well, okay, that's a bad stress. No one uses eustress. Like, I'm going to go to the gym today and get some eustress, and it's just like I'm going to go to the gym. So yeah, we just don't really understand the stress and things like that that's going to contribute to promoting or reducing inflammation.
Paradoxically, good stress, quote unquote, good stress, actually can reduce chronic inflammation.
Correct.
How,
Yeah.
how does that work?
So it's kind of like a dose response approach, which is we're challenging our body, we're forcing it to become more resilient. You exercise at a moderate to high intensity, intermittently, once a day, twice a day, multiple days in a row. You're forcing your body to basically tolerate a stress, figure out, okay, what worked, what didn't, and when you're building muscle, you're basically stressing the muscle, causing it to break down at the micro level, and then allowing it to rebuild so you become stronger, and things like that. So those would be good stresses. Some people, the topic of alcohol comes up in terms of, should I drink, should I not drink? And the question isn't one or the other. It's, how much volume are you consuming? If you're consuming more than two drinks, and people don't really know what an actual drink is, and that's probably a topic for a different discussion. But if you're consuming too much, that's not only going to impact your blood sugar level, it's going to impact your sleep quality. And those are a confluence of negative stresses that build up. And then the following day, your physiologic system has to deal with, things that it doesn't necessarily want to deal with. You got bad sleep, cortisol levels are going up because you're probably dehydrated. Like, all these things kind of compound. And then you have a bucket of, a decent volume of negative stress. Even exercise or eating clean is not necessarily going to balance that out. And if you are honest with yourself and you think about, in a year period, how much time were you working on modifying stress in a positive way versus introducing things that increase negative stresses, increases inflammation, and then you're kind of in recovery and repair mode. I think if most people were honest with themselves, they would appreciate you probably spend more time in repair recovery, which is associated probably with higher levels of inflammation
Hmm.
versus that period of building and allowing your body to tolerate mild stresses that are ultimately introduced to help you grow and strengthen, across the board. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So, what are some other types of beneficial stress? We talked about exercise, but are there any others?
um, I mean, again, like circling back to kind of like the alcohol conversation, probably a glass of alcohol is for some people believe that's a positive stress.
Hmm.
Um, but you want to make sure the ethanol consumption is a high quality. So a good red wine, a well distilled liquor, vodka, gin, clear tequila, something like that. So those would be positive stresses. Off the top of my head, oddly enough, there's not a ton that I can think of right now.
Well, I mean, you practice in a world class medical facility,
Yeah,
Monarch in West Hollywood, and
yeah.
you guys have saunas, you have cold water immersion.
There we go. Thank you for reminding me. So yeah, stimulating your vascular system, immune system to tolerate heat and cold. What is that doing in terms of growth hormone output? There's cold exposure is associated with certain physiologic adaptations that may allow for increased healing and reduced body fat. And same thing with heat, exposing yourself to heat, increasing blood flow, increasing filtration of your vascular system to eliminate toxins and things like that. So there's methodologies and modalities that have been used for a long period of time that basically just kind of like manipulated our environment, whether it's movement or, as you reminded me, the heat and cold exposure that are stressing our system in a way that promotes an adaptation that's ultimately beneficial for us, if that makes sense.
Interesting. And so when you do those, is it normal to see? Because I was actually, you mentioned continuous glucose monitors. I was kind of shocked to see. I wore one for about 2 weeks, and I sat in a sauna, an infrared sauna, and I was kind of shocked to see that my blood sugar actually spiked as a result of sitting in the sauna.
Yeah, so I think the technology in terms of what the data that we're gathering from a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, is still in its infancy. So we're
Mm,
just trying to figure out what's for people like ourselves who don't have a baseline, pancreatic endocrinologic disorder like diabetes. How are we going to use this to help optimize our physiologic function? I think for right now, for most people, it's looking at inflammation associated with diet, like really what foods are causing a spike in blood sugar, which is probably associated with an inflammatory response. Um, because we've in Los Angeles and other places where preventive medicine, forward thinking types of practitioners are emerging, there's a lot of testing that can try to help people theoretically optimize their life, but the evidence behind it is still being developed, so it's
mm,
not super strong. With simple blood sugar monitoring, like your blood can't lie. What's there is there, what's not is not, and how you respond is how you respond. Could that change over time? Certainly. But if you're trying to figure out because you're training for something or you just want to increase your daily performance, work life, whatever, your body's going to give you the best indication of what's working, what's causing inflammation, what's causing your blood sugar to spike, and things like that. And so now we have tools commercially available that will allow us to do that. So, um, to your point of why are you noticing a blood sugar spike? Could it be cortisol response? Could it
mm.
be, a stress response essentially because your body's saying, okay, like something's happening. We need to increase blood flow. It's straining your adrenal glands. We know from the Bikram yoga space that some people struggle with that level of heat exposure because it's stressing their adrenal glands, which is causing their cortisol to go up, which is a stress response. And when cortisol goes up, blood sugar goes up. When blood sugar goes up, inflammation goes up. So it's this cascade of your body basically saying, like, all right, something's happening. We need to be prepared. We need our immune system on alert. We need blood sugar available in case we have to run from something or fight something. So it's an evolutionary response. Like we said before, though, we don't want to eliminate those things completely. We want to minimize too much bad and we want to challenge our system because when we challenge ourselves, we get stronger. We just don't want that challenge to be repetitive in high doses or high volume, day after day, month after month, year after year, because at some point, the inflammation associated with whatever you're doing will cause essentially accelerated aging. And what that means is different based on physiologic system. It could be, DNA damage. It could be, vascular damage. It could be musculoskeletal nervous system damage that's commonly associated with diabetes, and can lead to all sorts of complications, vascular, neurologic, and otherwise. So, um, it's it's um, it's one of those things that we introduce in all other aspects of our life, which is moderation.
Hmm.
But I think when it comes to our physiologic system, we're just not really good at understanding how much is too much or how much is not enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So it's kind of like the difference between acute and chronic. Like
Exactly.
it sounds like in that context, that acute spike in my blood sugar was actually a sign that I was doing exactly that my body was responding exactly as it should have been
Correct.
sitting in a sauna.
Yeah, I
That I
mean,
was having
again,
a stress response.
seeing your blood sugar go up, like it's great
Yeah.
data to have, but what does that one data point look like over you using infrared sauna 3 to 4 times a week for a couple months? Like, if you could track that and see how your body responds, like, is it better tolerating the stress based on other components of your life? How much sleep did you get the night before? What was your food intake? Like, there's a lot of variables that could have contributed to that response. So, like, specifically taking that one piece of data is a little bit difficult to determine its impact. But to our point, like, now we can better evaluate a lot of these things. So hopefully people have more information, which can lead to better informed decisions so that we can minimize the amount of inflammation that we're exposing ourselves to, over our lifetime.
So it sounds like acute stress can actually reduce the risk of chronic inflammation, but chronic stress increases the risk of chronic inflammation. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. So acute stressors can ultimately allow us to develop resilience
Hmm.
for things that are going to inevitably happen through our life. And
That's so
that's
important.
correct. The downside of chronic stresses is our physiologic capability has limits. For instance, the immune system function, to use a basic example. If you are diabetic, blood sugar is not well controlled, you are going to have a higher baseline level of inflammation than someone that is not.
Hmm.
Well, we know that your immune system, white blood cells, respond to inflammation signals because they are basically designed to say, okay, if cells are producing an inflammatory response and inflammation molecules, they're proteins, like they're legitimate proteins. Your immune system is going to respond. But if you're constantly being inundated by this inflammation signal, we only have so many immune cells, right? So we can only allocate so many resources to that response, which increases your risk for colds, bacterial infections, things like that. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Well, the body is going to try to reproduce more white blood cells, more immune cells. But think of it like, an analogy I use with patients is like zipping up and unzipping a zipper. If you keep doing this a lot, eventually a prong may bend and then all of a sudden the zipper isn't working quite right. Well, that's the problem with chronic inflammation, chronic stress to the system over a long period of time. All we need is one mutation and something, negative could occur from, the cancer side or another, potentially more impactful disease. So, from an immune system, long term health, as we're like kind of circling back to what I talked about initially, if you want to live a long and healthy life and keep our body functioning at the level that we know that it's capable of, that's been demonstrated in blue zones and other pockets of the world's population. We want to keep our resources as functioning at as high a capacity as possible. And if they're constantly having to respond to these inflammation signals from wherever source we're introducing them, lifestyle, disease, or otherwise, ultimately we are probably going to truncate our quality of life for sure, and probably our lifespan.
What about exposure to environmental toxicants? Is that something that plays a role?
Absolutely. So, that is within the pantheon of human existence, a more relative
Hmm.
stressor that we haven't had to deal with up until probably the last 50, 100 years. And what is that looking like? Well, we're consuming things that we've never consumed before, synthetic ingredients, colors, flavorings that are ultimately designated, generally regarded as safe for human consumption, but we haven't done the work. We don't have the evidence or the studies to really say, what is this going to do to us long term?
Mm.
As long as it's not going to cause immediate harm, then they're released for utilization. And a lot of these things haven't been completely vetted out or completely studied, because there's just so many of them. And that's just from a food perspective, food and drink. We're also seeing with sunscreen is probably the most famous one recently. Studies have come out saying like a lot of these synthetic ingredients that help with the smell or the color of these balms and sunscreens we've been putting on our body, like, well, the skin's the largest organ in the body. So if it's getting on our skin and it's going into our skin, it's getting into our bloodstream. What then happens? And we're starting to see impact on hormone output, thyroid, testosterone, estrogens, progesterones, and things like that. So it's the analogy I use with patients is it's kind of like we've started slowly poisoning ourselves over a long period of time, and now we're starting to turn the corner on, beauty products that are vegan, cruelty free, foods that have to identify, are they genetically modified, what are the other artificial ingredients in there. And people on the coasts are becoming more aware of the, whole food, plant-based, grass-fed, grass-finished, organic. But there's a large population of the United States and the world that may not know or may not have access, so they're still being forced to consume things that have components that, may be harmful to their health. Most, probably harmful to their health. Um, in terms of environmental exposure, like air quality, I have no idea what we do about that. Like,
Wow.
I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not your guy to solve that problem. But that's a big one, especially in Los Angeles.
Well, I can offer one solution:
Yeah,
better ventilation
better
in buildings.
ventilation.
Yeah,
Sure.
as buildings work to become increasingly more efficient and cost effective, they become increasingly well sealed,
Yeah,
right? Like they become like hermetic chambers
yeah,
essentially because it reduces heating and air conditioning
yeah,
costs. But that actually comes with a dark side. Like
yeah,
that's a double edged sword. Yes,
yeah,
it reduces cost for the building,
yeah.
right, and the company, but it increases our exposure. It increases the concentration
Sure,
of volatile organic chemicals
sure.
in the air that we breathe. It
Yeah, I mean, it goes
increases
back to that
CO2 as well.
conversation of good stress, bad stress. Like, we're doing something to minimize a stress, which is cost, but we're also increasing a stress, which is exposure to things that may be permeating our environment for longer than, we're used to, or we're not able to filter as well. So again, like, it's for the most part, it's kind of a balance of how much of the good and bad are you allowing yourself to be exposed to, and then the body will take care of itself from there. So staying inside all day, not getting fresh air, from a filter standpoint, especially in buildings that are older. I live in an apartment that's probably hasn't been updated in 60, 70 years. Like, I have no idea what I'm exposed to from the ducts and all that stuff. So um
You might still have lead in the paint.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I guarantee you I did not check when I moved in. So those are some things that it's somewhat overwhelming if someone's trying to just, look at themselves 360, everything that's involved in their life from, soup to nuts, and try to figure out exactly how they can, optimize everything. Hence why I take the approach with individuals of like, let's control our controllables and things that are relatively easy to introduce, because a lot of people can't even do that. And it's not necessarily their fault. They just don't know. So we've talked about in the past sleep, how much, hydration, how much should you be consuming, nutrition, how much food should you be eating based on your lifestyle, and then you can dive into what's your quality, what's the quantity, what works best for you. Intermittent fasting, there's multiple levels to that. Movement, the World Health Organization has recently updated their guidelines and said everyone on earth should try to achieve 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity per week. Moderate intensity activity for you and me, that's probably similar. For my parents, moderate intensity looks a little bit different, but their data indicates 80 to 85% of the world's population doesn't hit that positive, stress level of moderate intensity, which helps with immune system function, mood, and things like that. So what I try to do with any individual that I talk to, a patient or not, I'm just like, which of those things can we improve? Hopefully all of them, because then if you look at other aspects of your life that may be contributing to some sort of stress leading to inflammation, there are things out of our control. So let's control our controllables. Let's try to sleep enough, drink enough water, move enough, eat appropriately, and then the intangible element of, your community, your support system, your friends, your support, like that emotional aspect of your health. Like, try to optimize that aspect as well. And then you should probably handle and be a little bit more resilient than individuals that are not doing that. But I think from a foundational perspective, at least in my opinion, that's where I'm introducing a lot of my effort and energy, which is to get people just to understand the basics. Like, you can't walk before you crawl, you can't run before you walk. So, like, let's get the foundations set, and then we can introduce a lot of the things that, your guests and you're familiar with, which is a little bit more advanced intervention to kind of tweak and fine tune. I'm seeing people that, and it's a majority of people that they're not even they fine tuning what, like, you don't have anything going on. So, because your foundation is not solid. So that's a lot of where my time and energy goes, is trying to get people to understand those foundations so that their body can be resilient, so that they can tolerate all the various stresses that they're going to be introduced to. And if you can tolerate those stresses better, you'll, better handle the inflammation that's inevitable in life. And if you can handle that and monitor its volume, your body should do exactly what it's supposed to do, which is function, allowing you to do what you want to do for as long as you want to do it. Time will come for us all, but hopefully, our health span is prolonged by minimizing the amount of stress and inflammation that's contributing to potential, breakdown and negative health outcomes.
I love that because sometimes you can't. I mean, this notion of cultivating greater resilience, because sometimes you can't control the environment
No.
that you are tasked with having to navigate. I mean, sometimes
Right.
you just have to work in an office and breathe in the VOCs and the increased levels of carbon dioxide and all of the unhealthy lifestyle behaviors that accompany that. But what you can do is you can cultivate greater resilience. And we've talked about exercise, we've talked about getting your sleep right. But from the standpoint of nutrition, is there any way that you can eat your way to a state of greater resilience so that you have a
Mhm.
greater level of protection against inflammation?
So we can approach this one of two ways, right? What are you going to eat that's going to help reduce inflammation? The common ones, turmeric or curcumin, very common. A lot of parts of the world, the Middle East, that's a staple of their diet. And if you look at the inflammation associated illnesses, cognitive, physiologic, and otherwise, significantly less than the American population.
Hmm.
And the hypothesis is, well, they're consuming a lot more curcumin than we are. Probably reasonable. The other way that you can look at it is, what should you not eat, right? Because even if you're taking turmeric every day, but your diet's high in simple processed foods, you're consuming too much alcohol, you're not getting a wide variety of fruits, vegetables, fiber that helps feed our gut so we can process things appropriately. And then once they do eventually enter our bloodstream, they're processed in a way that doesn't cause an inflammatory response. I think we're learning more about gut health and the microbiome, and understanding if we're not digesting things appropriately, we're basically being exposed to food molecules that are half digested that we
Hmm.
haven't seen before. And our immune system's like, well, this is new. So let's, send the signal to investigate this. And that's where the idea of these food sensitivities comes along. So I try to help patients understand there are things that we know are beneficial from reducing inflammation. Like I said, curcumin, fish oil, vitamin D, those are pretty well studied and evaluated. But there's not enough of those three things in the world to overcome an unhealthy regular diet on a daily basis, because you're eating 3 meals a day. And if 3 meals a day for 52 weeks out of the year, 50% is good, 50% is bad, like, there's not enough supplements or, things that are going to help you. So that's from the supplement side. From a food side, I think we are wildly under consuming the amount of fiber that we need. So, more whole food, plant based, Mediterranean style eating.
Doesn't fiber actually help you poop out toxins?
Yeah. So uh, it's not really complex, but essentially what we're doing is we're feeding our gut bacteria. We're introducing a compound that may or may not be completely digested. And when it's not, part of the reason we want to consume fiber is because it's going to draw liquid into our intestines so that we can evacuate stool, which is essentially a reservoir of waste. If you're not moving that stool, you're basically keeping this garbage in your intestinal system for a longer period of time. And your intestines are highly vascular. So, the longer it's in there, the more likely, something may get back into your system. So we want that fiber to feed our gut, to help with digestion, to help with regular bowel function so we can evacuate things that we don't need. And if you don't do that, then, it's like sitting in a poorly ventilated room. Like the longer you're in there, the more you're exposed to things, the more likely they're going to impact you. Does
Wow.
that make sense? So
Yeah.
that was a little bit of an odd analogy that just came to me in the moment. So yeah, that's something to think about in terms of just your basic diet. And I try not to get stuck on necessarily prescribing a specific eating style for people. I think there are multiple variations. Ultimately, for me, the best nutritional program is one that you can stick with, right? So that's where I spend most of my time. But the data would indicate the PrediMed study that was done a while ago. The Mediterranean eating style is probably one of the most efficacious and probably easy to stick to for most people. Some may argue, but it was a pretty well done, large volume study. So that's where I tend to direct people because it's healthy fats, lots of fiber, wide variety of fruits and vegetables, not too much plant-based protein, and basically moderate amounts of those things that when consumed in too large a volume are going to cause a lot of bad stress. So the grains, the dairies, the alcohol, things like that. So, and not a lot of processed food. So, to summarize, essentially looking at this from two fronts is what are the things that you can consume that will help with inflammation? We talked about some supplements, but also what are the things that we should avoid consuming that we know are pro-inflammatory. And Dr. Andrew Weil, who
You studied under him, right?
yeah, he was my fellowship advisor at University of Arizona, created True Food Kitchen, which I think there's 20 of those restaurants now around the United States. And their nutrition, their menu is built on the anti-inflammatory eating style, which is essentially Mediterranean with greater emphasis on certain spices and oils and things like that. So if you've never been to True Food Kitchen, shameless plug, you should go. It's really good. But you'll look at their menu like, yeah, this is stuff that I can probably consume or make on my own pretty regularly. It's tasty, it's good for you, it's great for your gut, helps reduce inflammation. So um, those are the types of foods that I would steer people towards when we have that conversation.
Yeah, it just sounds like, I mean, you're advising people stick to just real food,
Eat real food.
eat real food.
Yeah. So we've done it for millions of years.
Yeah.
Works pretty well.
In the wellness industry, you see a lot of marketing and particularly marketing of detox programs, especially now we're sort of at the beginning of the new year. You see a lot of people selling detox teas and supplements and cleanses and things like that. As a medical doctor, what's your take on these? Is there any place for them? Are any of them efficacious, or
Yeah.
are people best off steering clear?
I think again, intermittently, depending on what you're doing. Is it a fasting mimicking? Is it a fast? Is it a water fast? Is it a detox tea, juice cleanse, something like that? Um, Depending on what it is, I like to evaluate them individually to
Hmm.
figure out what are they offering and what's the evidence behind it. Then between those two things, depending on the individual, something to again stress your system positively, a fast, a 72-hour fast. Like Prolon is an excellent program that can be used intermittently to help develop resilience physiologically. I think there is a place for them. I think we far too often try to rely on them to cure the ills that we've introduced into our daily life. And that's not necessarily their designation. It's kind of a, maybe once every 6 months, once a year intervention that can, clear things out, stress us in a positive way, fortify our immune system function, and basically press the reset button, so to speak. No pun intended, to allow us to start off the next leg of our journey. So it's variable. I think where you're getting it from, quality, any evidence that has been able to be examined with regards to efficacy are all things that someone should consider. But not every detox is going to change your life.
What about like I see a lot of people doing like just juice cleanses? Like they eliminate solid food from like that to me sounds a little ridiculous.
May I say no comment on that and just like move on? Again, s- some evidence.
Let's get controversial, Dr. Green.
Yeah.
Come on.
I have a lot of patients that like to do, celery juice in the mornings. They think it helps them have a bowel movement. You know, some evidence, yes. I would argue that probably what they're doing is just drinking liquid, which we know, especially earlier in the day, based on physiologic function, probably allows us to evacuate, our bowels. So, is it the celery juice? Could the a similar impact be associated with just drinking enough water? Like, you know, the study still needs to be done. Um, the issue with juice cleanses is the amount of sugar that is in many of them is probably detrimental to our overall physiologic health. It's probably doing more harm than good. Um, it kind of depends. I think the traditional cleanses that I've seen that I've seen subjective impact from don't taste that good. There's cayenne pepper, other green vegetables that they're not always super palatable. The ones that people tend to love to do are orange, pineapple, things like that we know are basically just sugar. And we've already pulled the fiber from them. So it's like a massive glycemic insult to the body. And we know when blood sugar is all over the place, that's a stress, it causes inflammation. And it's probably not that beneficial for us. So um, I tend to, like I said before, try to pull people back to let's keep that bullet in the chamber, so to speak, and we can use it every once in a while, perhaps, but prove to me you can get enough sleep, you can drink enough water, you can move your body, you can eat appropriately on a consistent basis, and then we can introduce these things and see how they help you overall.
I love that. One of the more I gotta ask because one of the more extreme things that people in LA do, people in LA always in search of a quick
I
fix.
had a guy the other day told me he had a fecal transplant from a 5-year-old.
No
So
way.
yeah, and like the fecal transplant in terms of microbiome health for people that have had C. diff or a serious infection like that. There's some evidence coming out that it can be impactful, but I'm just like,
Did this
what?
guy have C. diff?
No,
What was he looking for? Just
I have
to
no idea.
interesting. Yeah, people will do crazy things in this city. I was going to ask about colonics. There's a lot of people that routinely get colonics.
Yeah, um, I understand the theory. I have not encouraged or guided anyone to do it, but I understand the theory behind it in terms of kind of flushing out anything that may be contained in the colon. Again, there's a lot of blood flow in that area. For good like suppositories, if you're going to do that type of medication, like you're putting something in the rectum because we know that it's going to get broken down and it'll dissolve and get in the bloodstream. So I understand the theory behind it. I've seen some individuals have some complicated outcomes even when done in a more sterile medical grade setting. So I haven't had enough experience with individuals that are doing it regularly and being able to understand like how is it actually helping you? What are the outcomes that we're looking for? Are they achieved or are they not? People just kind of do it, and subjectively they may feel better, they may not. I haven't really seen anything in the literature or otherwise that's indicating like yes, this is something that should be part of your regular medical regimen.
Yeah, I would assume that
Um,
they feel better acutely afterwards, but then once they go back to their old habits, whatever,
Well, yeah, what's changing? Like,
right.
what are you doing differently? So again, like if you're going to introduce that as kind of one of those um, interventions, once you have your foundation set, like sure, let's talk about it and see if it could be helpful. But if you haven't changed anything in your lifestyle and you just assume this is going to like flush you out and then give you a leg up from where you were before, like water always finds its level. You're going to eventually come back to what you were doing because that's what the body's used to. That's what you're used to. Those are the behaviors that you've become basically habitual. So yeah, it's this doing a colonic is like the same argument I get with folks that are like, I've been working out for a couple weeks. Why don't I see results? I'm like,
Hmm.
well, we've got years of poor behaviors we have to overcome. Like, you can't reasonably think that doing some good things for a couple weeks is really going to lead to a significant outcome. So that's kind of how we have to approach some of these more advanced interventions that we have exposure to because we're in Los Angeles. Um, and also, I think it's important for people like us with this platform to just be as honest as possible about like what we know and what we don't, right? I have this discussion a lot with my colleagues, which is, part of the integrative fellowship, part of the reason I did it with Dr. Weil was to understand what's happening in other parts of the world in terms of health and wellness medicine. We call it complementary and alternative medicine. They just call it medicine, right? So I wanted to better understand so I could improve my practice. And we kind of find ourselves, especially in the US, in this space of, well, where are the studies? What are the journal articles that support or don't? And a lot of these things, um, aren't going to be studied, especially coming that have been done for thousands of years. Like the arguments like why we know it works. So, and that's kind of some of the stuff that you were talking about and we talked about off air in terms of interventions that people can do that it seem trendy or kind of like fad related. Ultimately, um, I think it's up to the individuals providing health information and the practitioners to look at what is available, look at any evidence that's available, but also understand the person that's trying to introduce it into their program. Why are they doing it? What's the ultimate goal or outcome? Is it even appropriate? For a lot of these people, it's reducing stress and reducing inflammation and building resilience and hopes of longevity and anti-aging. But you know, is it right? Is it appropriate at this time? Are you doing things uh, appropriately outside in those other aspects of the life that you can control? And that's when we need to make the decision: are these things going to be more likely beneficial or not? And I'll kind of reserve comment on what I think a lot of them the outcomes are. But it's nice to have options,
Yeah.
but I think we need to be a bit more cautious in terms of just throwing a ton of variables in the bin and hoping we're going to get an outcome that we're looking for.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said earlier. Control what you can control.
Yeah.
Control the controllable. So you've talked about, some of the subjective ways that we can get a sense of whether or not we are under the influence of inflammation. You talked about some of the um, clinical signs, some of the disease states
Yep.
associated with chronic inflammation. But how do you actually how do you measure inflammation when a patient presents to you?
Yeah. So our typical approach with Monarch is we do comprehensive evaluation, medical, movement, and physical therapy. The movement and PT can elucidate things that I may not be able to find on my exam. When they're going through ranges of motion, moving your body, stressing your body, things may happen that I'm not able to reproduce. What we are able to reproduce and understand is basic lifestyle habits: sleep, hydration, nutrition, and then metabolic biomarkers. So
Hmm.
your blood can't lie. What's there is there, what's not is not. And if you don't know, you cannot fix it. And so we're trying to look at basic markers of physiologic function, organ system, liver, kidney, thyroid, heart disease risk factors, because that plays into a role if inflammation is present or not. Like, what does your cholesterol profile look like? And then the markers of inflammation that we're looking at are, super simple. Acute, like things like CRP, more chronic hemoglobin A1C to kind of monitor blood sugar control, because those play an impact, are impactful, I should say, with the other things that we're looking at: liver function, kidney function, thyroid, heart disease risk. And then also from a hormone perspective, a lot of people don't get their hormones checked. And we know an environment that's um, higher, I don't want to say highly inflammatory, but higher levels of inflammation than we would think are optimal, that's going to impact hormone function because the body is trying to figure out, all right, where are we allocating resources? If we have a lot of inflammation, should we, allow testosterone levels to be elevated in males? Because traditionally, if you have high testosterone, you're more likely to go out, you're more vibrant, you're more vital. So like there's a lot of things that as the practitioner we can generate from these basic lab reports that also may impact everything else that we're doing in life: movement, nutrition, and alike. So That's what we're doing in terms of our basic understanding of inflammation. There are certainly other inflammatory markers. Some are more acute, some are more chronic. But the ones that we look at are often covered by insurance, depending on what insurance you have. And also, it's like for some people, it's the first time they've ever looked at these numbers.
Hmm.
So again, before introducing so many things that people are, encountering paralysis by analysis, like let's do the simple stuff first. Like let's see what's there and what's not. And if we have a question, we can dive deeper. Like let's not just go all the way to the deepest end that we can possibly go and pull all this data. And now we're sitting here like we don't really know what's coming from what. We just know it's present. So we like to go in a stepwise approach so that we can understand better physiologically what is your body telling you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. CRP, what is that?
C reactive protein is an acute phase protein that's expressed by many different types of tissues, cardiac, skeletal muscle, and otherwise. And you can measure the different subtypes, kind of where it's coming from. But we typically use it as more of like a short term metric of how much inflammation is in your system at this moment when we drew
Hmm.
your blood. It can fluctuate throughout the day. If we did it after a workout, it's probably going to be a little bit higher. If you do it
Interesting.
first thing in the morning, it'll probably be a little bit lower. But these are things that we track over time because if we see consistent higher than reasonable levels of CRP and optimals around 1.0, then to me it'd be like, all right, well, what's causing this? You know, is it a chronic infection? Is it exposure to something from the environment? Is it metabolically related? Is it a diabetes and insulin sensitivity issue? In the older population, it could be joint or arthritis related. Are we generating inflammation secondary to the musculoskeletal system? There's a lot of things, and that's why it's not super specific. But for instance, if it's 14, the range, like the healthy range, is roughly 1 to 3. Then at least I know, like, all right, something is going on in here, autoimmune disease that hasn't been addressed. Like, who knows? But at least it's an indicator of like, oh, all right, like, well, you definitely have a reason to not be feeling quite right because your inflammation levels are through the roof. So it's kind of like that first sentinel sign of like, all right, we either should dive deeper, try to figure something else is going on, or everything looks pretty good. It's probably not necessary to introduce the extra cost and expense to do a vast array of lab panels. So that's one that we do for kind of acute. The chronic is hemoglobin A1C. It's a sensitive marker associated with diabetes risk and insulin sensitivity. And you would be amazed how many people are kind of borderline pre-diabetic or fully pre-diabetic, which again in itself isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, but typically as we age, our health behaviors usually don't improve. We become more sedentary. We start eating whatever we want because we're like,
As we get older, right?
yeah. We're like, how much time do I have left? Like, I
So
want to enjoy my cake.
the conditions associated with aging, is it because there's something inherent to the aging process that makes us all more prone to sickness as we get older, or is it just that? It's that our diets we get increasingly lazy about self-care and eating healthy
I mean, I think it's probably a combination of both, but I
mm,
think if you look at individuals that are older that have maintained an active lifestyle, they're moving their bodies, they're eating clean, they're not drinking too much, they're not smoking, they're eliminating those sources that we know are increasing inflammation, increasing negative stresses to their body. We're all aging; it's inevitable. That's again a topic for a different podcast of like this chasing the fountain of youth, like. But I think what I try to get people to understand is the more stress we introduce to our system, the higher likelihood that our mechanisms are going to break down, right? Because you think about it, every protein, every amino acid that we produce is millions of DNA base pairs long, and all it takes is a couple mutations to make things really go awry. And so if we're constantly forcing our body to like produce things to repair damage that we've done based on our lifestyle, the inflammation that we're introducing, the higher likelihood things are going to happen. So I think that's from a physiological standpoint. That's where, like the stress and the inflammation plays a role. From the subjective, just basic lifestyle standpoint, I think as people get older, like we just assume that we're going to accrue chronic diseases. There was a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine from around like 1980. A physician, I think his last name was Dr. Freeze, basically said this. There's this hypothesis that right when you hit 50, all of a sudden your health outcomes just like plummet.
Hmm.
And he's just like, what about these populations that basically like continue just churning along? And you're going to have decline over time, but it's not this precipitous like cliff. And, the cultures that maintained health, maintained movement, maintained sleep quality, maintained good nutrition, strong community and support system, and just avoided things that unnecessarily taxed their body, if that makes sense. So I talk with patients. I have some younger patients that are like, you only live once. I'll sleep when I die. I'm like, that's
Hmm.
going to come a lot sooner, if you keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And if you're okay with that, God bless. It's your journey. But I think for the most part, people want to be able to enjoy and have a high quality of life for as long as they possibly can. And that's what we hope to achieve with what we're doing at Monarch and other things like that, which is increasing health span, increasing that opportunity that you can continue to do things that bring you joy from a movement lifestyle perspective. And the way we believe to get there is keeping your body strong, resilient, minimizing unnecessary inflammation, and building strong lifestyle habits that will support all those things that I just mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, because today, what's typical, right? Our lifespans our lifespans are extending,
Correct.
but our health spans are shrinking.
Yeah, I would argue with anyone like I could keep you alive as a physician with the right resources for maybe ever, right? That's probably an exaggeration, but a long time,
Hmm.
far longer than your body probably wants to exist. But you're right, health span, quality of life, like I would argue that's probably decreasing because we are more sedentary, we are heavier, we have more inflammation, diseases of lifestyle, like type 2 diabetes is the best example that we've, 100 years ago was basically non existent. So we've introduced all these stresses and all these inflammation related diseases that are truncating the time period that we can enjoy our life. And then, like, I would challenge anyone if you knew that if you just cut out some things in your lifestyle or exercise more, or slept more, that you could live to 70 or 80 and basically not take any medication and have a high quality of life, enjoy your grandkids and doing what you want to do. You're not going to perform necessarily at the same level as you did when you were 20, but if you could have that long quality of life and it was guaranteed, I bet a lot of people would stop doing what they're doing in terms of, lifestyle associated issues or behaviors, excuse me, that are contributing to these long-term chronic issues. Conversely, if I said, keep doing what you're doing, but your 60s, 70s, and 80s are going to be associated with hospital visits, doctor visits, trying to count, pills and make sure they're all organized in your pill counter, like, and you're not going to be able to walk as well. You may be in a wheelchair on oxygen, like a lot of these things that we see regularly. We don't even think about it anymore. I that's unfortunately the reality that a lot of us are facing. And I think we could correct that if we just understood what we were talking about earlier, which is controlling your controllables and increasing your resilience. Um, the other thing that we're working on with Monarch is this idea of like, why don't people do that? Why don't we change these behaviors, right? Um, and I think part of the issue right now is that there's no really incentive to
Hmm.
do that, and that's one of the things we're navigating and working on is like, how can we incentivize you to want to take care of yourself because you are a part of a larger fabric. Your healthcare decisions do impact the people around you. So, how do we change that behavior? Because ultimately, aesthetics alone, for the most part, people will try, spend money. They may fail and they're like, yeah, it really doesn't matter that much to me anymore and don't change it all. But what I don't want is, a generation of people that have to have some sort of catastrophic health outcome like what we're seeing right now in, the COVID environment to realize, oh shoot, like I should have been paying attention to my mental health, physical health, body weight, what I'm eating. Because right now, for a lot of people that haven't, they've had more serious, issues with this virus. So how do we avoid having to have multiple pandemics to get people to understand like it's time to take control of your health So that's what another avenue we're exploring and close to kind of dialing in,
Mm.
which is how do we incentivize people to participate in something that will ultimately lead to a longer and healthier and higher quality and enjoyable life.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super interesting question to think about. Also, at the national level, like
Yeah,
some people have proposed like a sugar tax
yeah,
to get people to consume less, added sugar. But I've often wondered, like maybe there should be some kind of incentive, whether it's from health insurance companies or from even the government, because like chronic disease is so expensive.
crazy
It's
expensive.
so expensive, right? So what if there was some kind of like, and this is like a half baked idea, so I
Yeah,
haven't fully thought through this, but what
I have the full baked idea. So
you do?
between the two of us, yeah,
Okay, yeah, but like
we'll
what
make
a
some progress.
stimulus, like some kind of incentive, some kind of financial incentive for people who are like going to the gym for
Yeah,
3 to 5 days a
yeah,
week, or can show
yeah.
somehow that they're eating healthy, some kind of reward system. I
I
don't
think
know.
you're on the right track. I think you're on the right track. I don't want to divulge too much, but I think we have enough data. And you used an interesting term in previously in this conversation, like reductionism. We've basically taken the health and wellness and said, you are, these are the silos that we operate within, and they're not going to talk to each other, but you have to do stuff in all of them. But it's incumbent on you, your time, money, effort, and energy to do all that. And most people won't because it takes a lot. But within all those buckets, movement, sleep, chronic disease risk, we have good metrics and are getting better data associated with what are the things that we should encourage people to try to shoot for. And then how do we incentivize them to get there? And that's kind of hope what we're seeing in Europe and other places is kind of like the gamification of wellness. Like, you know, um, if you hit a certain number of steps that can be tracked in a wellness app, you get a gift card for Amazon or something. And like that may move the needle for a lot of people. For some, it's not quite enough. So how do we continue creating and thinking ways to help, reduce inflammation, reduce stress, bad stress, and improve positive stress so that we can encourage people, incentivize them to pursue healthier lifestyle behaviors. And yeah, I think we're getting closer.
Love that.
Yeah.
So low hanging fruit for most people to
Yeah.
reduce inflammation. Make sure that you're getting positives, acute doses. You're dosing yourself with beneficial stress.
Yeah.
Use stress. Eliminate the de-stress, the
Yeah.
distress.
Yeah.
Um, when it comes to sleep, making sure that you're sleeping.
Yeah. I would, yeah, to summarize, sleep, movement, hydration, quality nutrition. If you have the ability, pay attention to your metabolic health. Like you know, we have lab testing capabilities now, Everlywell, other things like you can get a lot of data to look at those markers of inflammation for 150, $200. Like for me, if that meant staving off diabetes, which is going to cost people, tens of thousands or more, like it's worthwhile getting some information on what's going on inside of our body. So sleep, movement, nutrition, hydration, looking at these markers of inflammation we can test for. And then the final aspect is that emotional, like mental health, which is becoming thankfully much more discussed these days, which is your support system, because we know unequivocally, and this is, published medical data, people that have serious life events do less well when they don't have a strong support system around them. That's a stress. Who do I call? Who do I talk to? Right. So, and we mentioned it before we got on this podcast, like we're more connected than ever, but we're also more separated than ever. Like people don't really have good, true friends anymore because you don't have to do anything. So that's an area that we didn't really get into because it's multifaceted, but that's one of the things that I think is an integral part of health is what does that mental and emotional support structure look like for people? And I think it's time we start talking about it.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed that conversation, you're going to love this one. Let's set up the problem for the audience. What are the risk factors that people encounter every day that are leading to brain disease and inflammation?
So Americans are the unhappiest they've been since the Great Depression. If you think of the pandemic, the societal unrest, the political divide, our obesity epidemic, the epidemic of hypertension that most people really aren't talking about, it's sort of we're not in a good place. And depression was at epidemic levels before the pandemic. In February of 2020, it was 8.5% of the population. By August of last year, it was at 28%. It had tripled in just a matter of months. And for children, anxiety disorders and depression doubled. So if you think of isolation, fear, death tolls, and then during the pandemic, people engaged in a lot of bad habits. Alcohol went way up, and especially in younger adults, weight problems skyrocketed. And it was actually the worst for early 20-somethings. And all of those things lead to unhappiness. But we're here to talk about happiness. So, one of the things I realized is happiness, like physical health, it's a daily practice. That, you can't be 50 pounds overweight on Monday, have a salad, and expect to be trim on Friday. That you have to work at it. And if you're going to stay healthy, you have to work at it. Mental health is exactly the same way.
I love that. I appreciate that so much. And, just to offer my own anecdote to what we started out talking about, just how bad our habits have become, especially over the past year. I was at Whole Foods the other day in the wine section, and one of the employees came over, very, very gracious to try to help me pick out a bottle. It was my brother's, actually. And he told me that wine has just been flying off the shelves over the past year. And that was really interesting to me, that people are drinking so much more right now.
And alcohol is not a health food. Alcohol is a prescription for unhappiness because people who drink every day have a smaller brain. And when it comes to the brain, size matters. And my biggest blog last year was called I Told You So. I've not been a fan ever since I started looking at the brain because it makes the brain look toxic. And but, I'm fighting against this sort of societal mindset that, I probably should have 1 or 2 glasses of wine a day. And the American Cancer Society came out last year and said we shouldn't drink because any alcohol is associated with an increased risk of 7 different kinds of cancer. And when I first dated my wife, she said, I'll never tell you I told you so. And she completely lied. It's like her favorite thing to say. And so I start the blog with that, but then I went, look, I told you so. This is not good. Cancer is obviously bad for your brain and bad for happiness.
Yeah, you've never been an advocate of alcohol consumption ever since, since I've met you. This has been something that you've always talked about. And it's interesting because some in the medical community will say, well, alcohol in moderation is actually good for you, but we don't really have solid evidence to say that.
It's a lie.
Yeah.
I mean, anything that damages your brain is bad for you. There may be some studies that say there are some heart benefits from the polyphenols, but you can get polyphenols from blueberries or from raspberries. And alcohol causes way too many problems, from drunk driving accidents to domestic violence to divorce to bad decisions during parenting. It even makes you think. It makes you misjudge the number of calories that you've eaten a day. And if the goal is to live long and be happy, alcohol is just not a great part of the equation.
Couldn't agree more. So, Doctor, what are the secrets to happiness that no one is talking about?
So there's 7 of them. And the first one is happiness is a brain function. That I actually did a study for this book where we looked at 500 consecutive patients' Damon Clinic. So we gave them the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire, a really well-researched questionnaire about happiness. And then we looked at their brains. And the people that were unhappy had lower activity, lower blood flow in the front part of their brain. And what that tells you is you should never let a child hit a soccer ball with their forehead. Damaged your frontal lobes, damage happiness. And so I talk about how to keep your brain healthy or rescue it if it's headed for trouble. So that's the first, the foundational, the most important secret. And you look at all the happiness books, nobody talks that happiness is a brain function, and you best keep your brain healthy if you want to be happy. Number two, people talk about happiness is associated with novelty and gratitude and positive thinking. But they don't tell you that it's really different for everybody. One of the big lessons I learned from imaging is we all have different brains. Some are balanced, some are spontaneous, means they have low frontal lobes, some are persistent, they have high frontal lobe activity, some are sensitive, some are cautious, that we really need to gear happiness strategies to how your brain works rather than thinking one prescription will work for everyone. So, for example, some people like jumping out of airplanes and that makes them super happy. And other people like me think that's just got to be the dumbest thing, the jump out of a perfectly good airplane.
I'm with you.
Some people love scary movies, and people have sleepy frontal lobes. They're the kind of people that get joy running with the bulls in Spain. And people have high frontal lobe activity like me. It's like, nah, I don't think we're going to do that. That just doesn't seem rational. And so targeting the strategy to your brain type is just critical. The third one is supplementing your brain. 97% of the population is low in omega-3 fatty acids. 85% of the population is low in vitamin D. We know both vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids are associated with mood. And so what are the supplements? And my favorite one I talk about in the book is saffron. There are 24 randomized controlled trials showing saffron is as effective is antidepressant medication. But rather than most of the medications I prescribe can sort of decrease your sexual function, saffron has been shown to enhance your sexual function.
That's good news.
And then 4 is you only want to love foods that love you back. That nutrition is absolutely essential to a happy life. You know that. But a lot of people, they look at cupcakes and donuts and pastries and pizza and pasta, and they go, oh, that makes me happy. Yes, in the short run, because those things actually can raise serotonin in your brain. The problem is they're addictive and they increase inflammation. So it's not something that'll help you feel better now and later. And that's what you always want to do. You want to learn, what can I do that helps me feel good now and tomorrow? Because that's the prescription for happiness. Hedonism is actually the prescription for unhappiness because it wears out your pleasure centers. Like I've been blessed to see some really amazing people like Justin Bieber and Miley Cyrus. And I just got to see Meghan Trainor. We did something public together this week, and fame wears out the pleasure centers in your brain. It makes you really vulnerable. 5 is my really fun one. It's gain psychological distance. To master your mind and gain psychological distance from the noise in your head. And there's a fun technique about giving your mind a name, just to gain separation from that part of you that often abuses you and makes you unhappy. So it's really about mental discipline, which is critical. And 6 is notice what you like about other people. Other people are so contagious, but you have a big control over the quality of your relationships. And then 7 is live each day based on clearly defined values, purpose, and goals. So you have to tell your brain what you want and then ask yourself, does it fit? Does my behavior fit the goals I have for my life? And you do those 7 things. We actually did a 30-day happiness challenge. 32,000 people signed up. At the end of 30 days, for the people who finished it, they were 30% happier. We're pretty excited about that.
That's amazing. So I want to tease out a few things from these 7 secrets that you just listed so eloquently. First off, saffron. How do you integrate saffron? First of all, where do you buy it? How do you integrate it into your diet? Do you integrate it into your cooking, or do you actually take it as a supplement, as you suggested?
So I take it as a supplement every day. And I integrate it into cooking whenever it makes sense. And I could also put it in tea. But my supplement company, BrainMD, I've been following the research for saffron for 15 years. And I'm like, let me get the dose that's in the studies. It's 28 milligrams, a high quality. And then I mixed it with curcumins and zinc, because both of those have been found also to increase your mood. But there are other companies that make it. And I think it's just easy to do as a supplement. And I remember when the pandemic started, I just finished it. And we just released it in March of 2020. And my dad got sick and died. I had to close my New York clinic for a while. I'm like, I think I'm going to take this.
Isn't saffron an essential ingredient in like paella, I want to say?
It is.
It is.
Yeah. It's the main spice in paella.
Is it? Wow. I'm so, I've impressed myself that I knew that. Yeah, because you usually see it at the checkout counter in supermarkets, and it's this very delicate, wispy, beautiful red spice. I don't know where it comes from, but it can also be.
It's the most expensive spice in the world. So pound for pound, it's more expensive than gold. Wow. And it comes from Iran, from Spain, from Greece. Those are the 3 countries that produce the most of it.
Wow. Love that. Definitely going to be looking out for it next time I hit the supermarket. When it comes to nutrition, what are some tenets of your dietary recommendations to support optimal brain health, brain function, and ultimately mental health?
I think it's actually very much like you talk about in your books. It's colorful fruits and vegetables, high fiber. It's getting your gut right. So you have to feed your gut bugs because they make you happy or unhappy. So high quality protein and a whole bunch of healthy fat. That low fat diets are actually bad for happiness. There's a higher incidence of depression. And a lot of people, they get freaked out by fat because of cholesterol. But low cholesterol's been associated with depression and suicide. And so I'm sort of a fan at keeping your cholesterol high normal rather than too many people, their cholesterol is 220 and their doctor puts them on a statin and now it's 120. And that is a big risk for cognitive and mood problems.
Yeah, I mean, there's very high cholesterol that you would see in somebody perhaps with familial hypercholesterolemia. But a lot of people are taking statins like from a Pez dispenser almost for cholesterol levels that are, as you said, just high normal, which I think is kind of a shame.
Well, there's a book I like by Steve Sinatra and Johnny Bowden called The Great Cholesterol Myth. And, mine sort of runs about 220. And a lot of doctors would medicate me. But my HDL is like 90. And so when you actually do the ratio, and I had a coronary CT recently, my heart's just fine. I think it's important to not treat numbers, treat people.
I love that. Couldn't have said that better myself. What are your thoughts on the consumption of animal products? And specifically, there have been a number of really interesting reviews to come out to show associations between low meat diets, vegan, vegetarian diets, and increased risk for depression and other mood disorders.
Yeah, I'm sort of, I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm a fan of fish, and healthy fish, sustainable fish, clean fish, because of the omega-3 content. And the human brain actually started to grow when humans started to eat meat, because our intestinal system could shrink, which would leave more energy for the brain. The problem is so much of the commercially raised meat is really not very good for you, because the omega-6 fatty acid content. But grass-fed meat, lamb, also turkey, chicken, if you're raising, I call it soul food, sustainable, organic, unadulterated, locally grown. I'm a fan of meat because, quite frankly, you can't get omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, from plants. And people go, well, what about flaxseed oil? You have to have 10 times the number of flaxseed oil as fish oil. And, and I, have this discussion a lot with my vegan patients, and sometimes for them it's just a value, and so I nudge them to get algae-based EPA and DHA. But generally, for myself, I think adding thoughtful animal products is a good idea.
I love this, and to be honest, I think that we should be able to have a discussion that candidly takes into account the breadth of the science that's out there, because, I think too often we allow facts to bend towards people's feelings, but facts ultimately shouldn't have to cater to one's feelings, right? We're just talking about what is optimal. And of course, everybody has their own ethics and their own MO when it comes to what they choose to put into their bodies. But if you're struggling with a condition related to mental health, stick with the science and what the science says about nutrition and brain health.
Well, Max, part of the problem is so much of the science is confusing. And scientists, when they publish a study, they have biases. And their bias often gets hidden in the numbers. So you'll find, vegans will go, well, look at all these studies. And meat eaters will go, but look at all these studies. And there's actually pretty good science. And that's why people get so confused. But, as I look at the research over time, people with low levels of omega-3 fatty acids, I actually published a big study on this, they have lower blood flow in their brain. Omega-3s are just absolutely essential for so many things, including decreasing inflammation.
Yeah, there was a study that just came out. It was a randomized controlled trial. I'm sure you've seen it. I think I shared it earlier this week. Older adult patients with coronary artery disease that supplemented with about 3 grams of combined EPA and DHA every day saw an improvement in their cognitive function, whereas the placebo cohort, continued to decline. So I think you're right. Omega-3s are super important from a vascular health standpoint, and we know that plays such an important role in good brain health.
Vascular and inflammation, those are 2 of the major risk factors for dementia. And I know that's what started you on this journey, how to not get dementia. And I have a mnemonic I like called Bright Minds, but the B is for blood flow, absolutely essential, and the I is inflammation.
So important. So your new book, you really blow the lid off of this notion that we all have different brain types. And that was, one of the secrets that you mentioned briefly to happiness that nobody's talking about. But I would love to go into this for a bit because, we've talked in the past on this show about chronotypes, which was a totally mind-blowing subject for my listeners, but we all have different brain types. And I think this is so interesting. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Well, when I first started looking at the brain, 1991, with a study called SPEC that we do at Amen Clinics, I'm like, oh, everybody's different. And I had this one couple who was failing in marital therapy. And I was about ready to throw in the towel when I started looking at their brains. Like I was ready to tell them to get divorced because I'm like, this isn't working. And then I scanned them. He had really sleepy frontal lobes and she had really busy frontal lobes. Well, for him, that sort of went with ADD, impulse control. He would love novelty and spontaneity, and a routine sex life would just bore him. Where with her busy frontal lobes, she loved routine and wanted things the same way. And I'm like, oh, the scans help me see the personality of the people in front of me. And so, the treatment for him was increasing his frontal lobes. The treatment for her was decreasing it. And then they could come in a balanced way and be happy. And over time, there are 5 primary types. So there's balanced, your brain's overall healthy, and most anything will make you happy. There's low activity in the frontal lobes. We call those people spontaneous. They need novelty. Your frontal lobes work too hard. You like routine. If you're going to pick your religion, you'll pick one with ritual, like you'll become Lutheran or Catholic. And, you just love routine. It just makes you comfortable and that makes you happy. And then there's our sensitive group that need connection with others. Their limbic brain works hard. The pandemic was really hard on them. And then there's our cautious group, our anxious group. They're never going to jump out of an airplane. And they do really well with like a warm bath or lavender. So knowing your type is just critical to knowing what are the strategies for you to be happy.
Well, that's so interesting. Are you finding that these brain types are rooted in anatomical differences in our brains, genetic differences? What do they stem from? Functional differences, how our brains work. And we tend to inherit them, but our life can impact them. So, for example, if you have a head injury, you're going to be more likely to be spontaneous because you hurt your frontal lobes. If you had early childhood trauma, you might have a combination of persistent, sensitive, and cautious because the stress you grew up in caused your emotional brain to become hyperactive. If your mom and dad were really thoughtful about their health before they had you, and they gave you like good guidance and firm limits and a healthy diet, you're just more likely to be balanced. But too often, nobody's really thinking about preconception medicine because, they're teenagers and young adults. And we don't do a good job of educating people about brain health. It just puts people to be more vulnerable. I feel like I might have a balanced brain type. I don't know if I necessarily relate to the more spontaneous brain type. My therapist actually says I need to work on being more spontaneous. I'm pretty sensitive, but I don't know if I'm overly so. Maybe I'm cautious. I don't know.
We haven't scanned you, have we?
I think you did for that segment on the Dr. Oz show that we were on together.
Didn't we do a QEEG as opposed to a SPEC scan? I think we did a QEEG.
Huh. Yeah. I mean, the segment that we were on was about technology. So you scanned my brain before and after using a smartphone.
Right. It was a QEEG where we looked at the electrical activity of your brain. And given your family history, I'm doing this series on Instagram called Scan My Brain, where we're taking young influencers. That's where we did Megan Trainor recently, and scanning them and then talking about it and then putting it out on Instagram. You'd be great for our series. We should talk about that.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. I mean, to be honest, I'd just be happy to confirm that I have a brain. Just to know that there's something in there and that it's functioning, firing on all cylinders. So this is super cool. And all of these brain types, I mean, they all fall within the realm of normal, right? I mean, there's no one brain type that's healthier or better than another. It's really a testament to the fact that we're all unique. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, although I think for my patients, they want to sort of strive for that balanced type. From a clinical standpoint, our spontaneous group tends to go more with ADD. Our persistent group, they can be neurosurgeons or sort of to the extreme can have OCD. The sensitive group, a lot of therapists, but can also struggle with depression. And our cautious group tends to be anxious. Although what I tell people, you need some anxiety in order to be happy. That people with low levels of anxiety die early from accidents and preventable illnesses. And so whenever I talk about anxiety, I'm like, well, let's talk about optimal anxiety, because that prevents you from doing stupid things that make you sad, right? Having an affair, driving too fast, experimenting with drugs, eating bad food, whatever. So it's you want to have enough anxiety, you do the right things, because that'll keep you happy, versus too much anxiety, which will obviously make you miserable.
Yeah, a little bit of anxiety actually boosts performance. But
correct, because you're preparing.
Yeah. I love this idea that what is going to bring about my optimal happiness is different than what might bring about my friend's optimal happiness, that we're also different. But can you just give me some specific examples? Like, what is something that a sensitive brain type, somebody listening to this who finds that they're very sensitive to world events and the energy in the room, what can they do to attain greater happiness that maybe might not work as well for somebody with a cautious brain type, and what can that person do?
So the sensitive person really does need to turn off the news, because it has a big negative effect for them. They need to be connected to people in their life that sort of feed their soul. The spontaneous person, not so much. Negative news sort of stimulates them, and they're always ready to fight about their position one way or another, but doesn't make them sad. The sensitive person does really well with supplements like SAMe or saffron. The cautious person, they need things that calm down their nervous system in order for them to be okay. So things like meditation and hypnosis, soothing music. And one of the strategies is, get a playlist of 10 songs that make you happy. And they're all soothing for the cautious group. They're connected for the sensitive group. So it's like, I have this song with my mom, or I have this song with my husband, or I have this song with somebody I love. So sensitive, it's really about connection that makes them happy. The cautious group, things that soothe them. The persistent group, they can get into a routine that makes them happy. Coming up on the holidays, they love the holidays unless there's trauma in there for them. The spontaneous people don't really love the holidays because you have to sort of plan for them. And for them, they're all, they're shopping Christmas Eve for other people in their life because they're not big on planning.
Interesting. Now you're making me feel like I do have a little bit of spontaneous brain type in me, because I'm a terrible planner, and I like trips, holidays. I'm the worst at that. I have a very close friend, actually. His name is Brian. He, I think, might be the sensitive brain type, and he always talks about how, like he'll say things like, "Oh, my nervous system can't handle that." He doesn't drink coffee, for example. Is coffee something that if you have a sensitive brain type, you might choose to avoid?
Yes, because it'll agitate you. Same for the cautious people. Spontaneous people love coffee. In fact, coffee calms them down.
Wow.
So knowing your type, and then, one of the cool parts about the book is looking for the micro moments of happiness as you go through your day. What are those things that just give you a little squirt of dopamine? And I talk about the different chemicals of happiness: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, GABA. And like hummingbirds for me, I don't know what it is. Just love hummingbirds in the morning. If I sit outside, and I have a decaf cappuccino I make for my wife every morning. And, if they're hummingbirds or butterflies or gardenias, special flower my dad used to grow, it connects me with him, and that makes me happy. But if you can sort of notice what makes you happy and then begin to take a list, because where you bring your focus always determines how you feel. And if you're sort of looking for happiness, you're just more likely to find it.
Are there any exercises that you offer people to help them make what it is in their lives become more clear?
Well, the seventh secret is live each day based on clearly defined values, purpose, and goals. And there are exercises for all three of those. What are your values? And so I like to separate them into biological values like health, memory, psychological values like honesty, flexibility, social values like connection or kindness, and spiritual values. And so there's like a dozen in each category. And it's like pick two or three from each category and ask yourself, when I make a decision, well, does it fit the values I choose for my life? And then there's an exercise on purpose that I like a whole bunch. It's like how to know your purpose in 5 minutes. Really special. And then I have them make clearly defined goals: biological goals, psychological goals, social and spiritual goals. And once you do that, it's an exercise I love called the one-page miracle. On one piece of paper, write down what you want. So, for example, with my wife, I want a kind, caring, loving, supportive, passionate relationship. Always want that. Don't always feel like that. Sometimes my mind will show up with rude comments to say. And when I filter it through, does it fit? It's like, oh, don't say that because it won't get you what you want, right? So it's not I should or shouldn't do that. As soon as you tell somebody you shouldn't do it, they want to do it, right? It's like, here are your goals. Does your behavior fit what you want? It's so powerful. And each of these 7 secrets have a simple question. And the question for live each day is, does it fit? Does my behavior fit what I want? So if I want to be 150 pounds, because I come from a family of fat people, I have a brother and a sister that are 150 pounds overweight, and I'm not. Why? Because I don't give in to the behaviors making it likely to be so. So when I look at the brownie or I look at the pasta or look at the pizza, I'm like, oh, it's a weapon of mass destruction for me. And I don't eat it. Not because I shouldn't eat it. I don't eat it because I love myself. And I want to live each day based on the values, purpose, and goals I have for my life.
I love that. You really have to cultivate self-love. It's so important, especially these days. Where does meditation play a role in your prescription for happiness?
Meditation crosses biological, psychological, and spiritual circles. I love meditation. I published a study on a Kundalini yoga form of meditation called Kirtan Kriya. It's actually a singing meditation. So 12 minutes of sa, ta, na, ma, increases blood flow to the frontal lobes, calms down your emotional brain. 12-minute meditation, really pretty cool. I also talk about loving kindness meditation that I love a lot. And that would fit under 5, manage your mind and gain psychological distance from the noise in your head. That one, it's just so rich. I talk about killing the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that steal people's happiness, meditation, hypnosis. And I have a fun exercise in there about interrupting unnecessary unhappy moments. So if your brain tends to default to an unhappy moment, for example, performance anxiety before you have to give a talk, you actually go into feel bad on purpose. And then, so go to that moment that makes you feel awful. Go feel bad on purpose. And then stand up and say, stop, and consciously go to one of the happiest moments of your life. Another exercise, write down the 20 happiest moments of your life. And then re-experience that with all of your senses. And you'll just notice how your brain shifts. And then celebrate, because celebration will anchor the happiness into your brain. And it's so simple, but can be so helpful.
Simple, helpful, powerful. Well, you mentioned ants, automatic negative thoughts. What are those?
So we live basically in a society of undisciplined thinkers. That they should have taught us this in 2nd grade. I was 28 before I learned I did not have to believe every stupid thought I had. That thoughts lie, they lie a lot, and it's our uninvestigated thoughts that make us miserable. And here I am, I'm 28 in my psychiatric residency. I'm listening to this professor talk about cognitive behavior therapy, and I'm like, I basically believe all the stupid thoughts I've had my whole life. It's like, no wonder you're anxious. And so the exercise is whenever you're sad or you're mad or you're nervous or out of control, write down what you're thinking. And then ask yourself, is it true? Can I absolutely know if that's true? And there's a whole process that I take people through. And I'm just stunned by the number of people where no one's ever taught them to not believe everything they think. And thoughts come from all sorts of places. They're written in our genetic code. If, your parents have had trauma, they come from the voices of your mom and dad or your siblings or your friends or the news you watch or the music you listen to. And just because you have a thought has nothing to do with whether or not it's true. Thoughts lie, and it's our uninvestigated thoughts that drive depression. Head to head against antidepressants, learning not to believe everything you think has been shown to be equally effective.
I love that. What are some, specific examples of those kinds of thoughts? Like, I'm a terrible dancer because somebody once told you 20 years ago that for whatever reason, they didn't think that you were a good dancer. Or I have a terrible singing voice because somebody back when you were in choir, in elementary school might have, some bully might have said that to you. Well, are those, would you say?
Do you have a negative thought? We'll work on that. Now we'll show people. What's a common negative thought that runs through your head?
Oh man, a common negative thought that runs through my head. I don't have any. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I haven't really had like a long-term, I haven't really had a healthy long-term adult relationship. I've had a lot of short ones that are fun and, and productive and healthy, but I haven't had like a long-term one. So
is the thought, I'm not capable, or there's something the matter with me, or what's the thought?
maybe that I'm, well, I was going to say maybe I'm too picky or something, but maybe maybe the thought is I'm not capable. So I just end up having all these, I end up like going for the low hanging fruit, the shorter term, where I don't have to work too hard.
So you write that down. I'm not capable of having a long-term relationship. And they're 5 simple questions. And I learned this from my friend Byron Katie, but they're so good. The first question is that true? You're not capable of having a long-term relationship. And I'm not a fan of positive thinking. I'm a fan of accurate thinking. So just do this with me. Is it true? You're not capable.
Is it true? No, it's not true. But I just, maybe I feel sometimes as though it's like not in the cards for me or something.
Right. So the answer is no. The second question, if 1 is no, 2 is automatically no. Because if you said yes, I would go, well, is it absolutely true? With 100% certainty, you're not capable of having a long-term relationship.
Right. The answer to that would be no.
No. The third question is, how do you feel when you believe that you're not capable of having a long-term relationship?
I feel bad.
Yeah. And you feel lonely, and you feel maybe more irritable when they disappoint you the first time. And you're like, this isn't going to work because it's not worked. And the fourth question is, how would you feel if you didn't have that thought? If you couldn't have the thought, I'm not capable of having a long-term relationship.
If I didn't have that thought, I would feel more empowered. I would feel more free.
I love that.
Yeah.
Freedom is the most common thing people say. And the fifth question is, take the original thought, I'm not capable of having long-term relationships, and turn it to its exact opposite. Now, not the narcissistic opposite, but just the opposite, which is, I am capable of long-term relationships. And then just ask yourself, do I have any evidence that the opposite is in fact true too?
I love that. I feel like this is like, I've over the past 8 months, I've started seeing like a therapist who specializes in like relationship stuff, and she's got me like meditating. This is like definitely very, very helpful.
So how would you answer that question? Do you have any evidence
that I am capable?
That you are capable?
Yeah, I feel like I have lots of, as I mentioned, I have lots of shorter term, and I've had a long-term on and off again relationship that wasn't the healthiest relationship, but there was nonetheless a lot of love there, and trauma and all that stuff. But yeah, and so I have those data points, but then I also know that I am somebody who has a lot of long-term relationships, of the non-romantic variety, that are very meaningful in my life. So I have lots of friends that I've had long-term relationships with, and I have long-standing relationships with the things in my life that I love, that might not be romantic, but for example, music, my relationship with fitness, my relationship with health and nutrition and how much I love those topics, my relationship with technology. So yeah, so those are all, I think, meaningful data points. Are they not?
And, one of my greatest gifts and also biggest challenges is I'm persistent. I was in a marriage for 20 years. It was awful for me. And so, yes, I'm capable of being in a long-term painful relationship, but that's not necessarily a good thing.
Right.
And Tana and I have been together 16 years, and that's a good thing. So I think it's okay to be selfish in the sense that, does it fit? So really know what you want in a relationship and just find out if it's a fit, always when you're doing the work on yourself. So I love that you're seeing somebody and working on healthy cognitive habits, emotional habits, but it's okay if it doesn't fit to say it doesn't fit, that's a sign of health, not that you're flawed, if that makes sense.
Wow. So did I just crush an ant? Is that what I just did right there?
You killed an ant.
I killed an ant.
Killed an ant. And one of the things, like when I saw Megan this week, I'm like, I want you to write down 100 of your worst thoughts. And then do those 5 questions thoughtfully, meditatively, with each of those 100 negative thoughts. And then your brain will start to default to question number 5. So if I get the thought, Tana never listens to me, I'll go, Tana does listen to me. And then I'll find the evidence and the thought won't bother me. But if I don't question that thought, I believe it, and then I act as if it's true. And that negative thought would actually give me permission to ignore her or be rude to her or feel sad because I believed a lie. And in the New Testament, there's a Bible verse, John 8:32, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And that's what I want for my patients, not positive thinking. I want accurate thinking. Now, I'll put a positive spin on it because that helps. Like I start every day with today is going to be a great day, get my mind going in a helpful direction. I finish every day with what went well today. But yet I want my mind thinking clearly, honestly, and accurately. And when I, get thoughts I don't need, everybody hates me, right? If you get a comment on social media of somebody that's just awful, managing your mind helps you be happy.
Managing your mind helps you be happy. So true. Is there a specific morning routine that you would recommend? You mentioned, waking up with a certain mantra. What could you talk to me more about that?
So I'm a very routine oriented person, and I start every day with today is going to be a great day. In fact, it's always on the top of my to-do list if I forget. And then I just sort of, what am I looking forward to today? That makes me happy. I do not start the day with Fox or CNN. I start the day with Good News Network. I'm looking for what's right in the world rather than just what's wrong. And then I will have a moment. I feed the dog brain healthy food and make this decaf cappuccino for my wife, and we spend time together. I also make a shake in the morning, and then I walk for 40 minutes while I do 2 huddles for work. I think it's really great to have a little huddle with yourself in the morning. What are my goals? What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? But I do that with my team at Amen Clinics, but I can't sit on Zoom all day long. It'll just make me crazy. So I do those meetings while I'm walking, generally someplace beautiful like Newport Beach or Corona Del Mar. And then, as I go about my day, I focus on question number 4. Is this food I love that loves me back? Because I just think nutrition is so important. And then at dinner, I have 3 kids still at home. I'm like, what went well today? That's the most common question. What went well today? And then when I put myself to sleep at night, I say a prayer And then I go, what went well today? And I actually start at the beginning of the day, just looking. And I'm always stunned by all the really cool things that I didn't really pay attention to. And it sets my dreams up to be more happy and more positive. And if you want to feel better tomorrow, sleep better tonight.
I love that. You mentioned in the morning you have a shake. Have to ask, what's in it? What's in that? What's in Dr. Daniel Amen's morning brain shake?
Oh, I love it so much. I told you I have a supplement company, so we make super clean, super healthy protein powder, and I like chocolate. It's got no sugar and a ton of fiber, plant protein. And I put Bright Minds powder. It's our combination of a great multiple vitamin and a brain boost, something called Smart Mushrooms with 6 different kinds of therapeutic mushrooms, neurogreens, a cup of strawberries or blueberries, a little bit of stevia blended. It's how I take half my supplements, and it tastes great. 230 calories, love it, loves me back. Just super happy. A lot of people, some of our friends, they go, oh, calories don't matter. And I think they're completely out to lunch, right? Coming from a family of fat people, like, no, calories really do matter. You can't have like a box of nuts, even though nuts are really good for you, and expect to be trim. So I sort of think of calories like money. And I always have a sense, if I eat 1,800 calories a day, my weight stays fine. If I pop up above that, I get a little chubby, which makes me unhappy.
Yeah, I agree. Calories definitely do matter. Are you, do you track your calories, or do you just at this point have an intuitive sense of how many you're consuming?
If I start gaining weight, I start writing them down. And during the pandemic, I only gained like a couple of pounds, but I could tell my pants were tighter, and I measured my waist, and I'm like, oh, because what cortisol does is it actually puts belly fat on you. And so even though my weight didn't change, my body was starting to change because of sort of the assault of stress that, was really hitting all of us. But I had lost my dad in the process, and that was hard for me. And so when that happens, I just, it's just on my phone in the notes section. I just start writing down what I eat, because people have calorie amnesia, and they forgot what they put in their mouth. And I'm a value spender. I have plenty of money, but I still hate wasting money, and I hate wasting calories. And people go, oh, that's so much work. I'm like, no, being sick is work, right? That's hard. Doing the right thing, it's a routine, right? I mean, everybody's in a routine. Does your routine serve you, or does it hurt you? And I just want to be in a routine that serves, because like you, I have a big mission in life, and I want to be around to enjoy it.
Yeah. And calories, we live in a time of energy excess, right? Some of the major chronic non-communicable diseases, at their core, you could almost argue that the etiology comes back to energy toxicity. We're eating too much, right?
We're eating too much, and we're eating too much of the wrong things.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
First of all, glucose and fructose have different effects when consumed, right? Glucose, when you consume it, primarily it's going to attempt to reglycogenate your muscle tissue. So glycogen is the term for the carbohydrates that we store in our muscles. We have a very limited storage capacity.
Right.
And glucose will also go to replete liver glycogen as well.
Mm-hmm.
But fructose only will go to replete liver glycogen. It goes straight to the liver, unlike glucose.